This morning we are going to shift gears a little bit. I wanted to preach a sermon out of Isaiah, and I wanted to discuss, as Danny read earlier, a little bit about the Sabbath. And it's something that when I went to Israel, the discussions we had and the things we talked about hit me really hard. Observant Jews still celebrate what they call the Shabbat, which is the Hebrew word for Sabbath, which means rest. And they start basically at evening on Friday, and it goes until evening on Saturday. It's 25 hours, and they basically do no work, as God said in Exodus, and also further speaks about. But it came in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, and He decided to do it in 6 days. And on the seventh day, it said He rested. And then He said this would be a sign between you and me, that we would do this. And so it's like 2,500 years before it's really brought up again in the book of Exodus after creation, but He's still pretty adamant about it. If you look at the Ten Commandments, and you've heard me say many times the Ten Commandments are set into two portions. Our love for God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. Now, that's why those are the two greatest commandments. The Ten Commandments, actually, each one of them represent one of those. It's the Sabbath that's in the middle. It's the Sabbath that makes that transition for us in loving God, but also in loving one another. It wasn't just about you not working. It was about your family not working and even your servants not working. This was an important thing. And when Moses gave the law, he not only said that this is one of the top 10 things that God wants you to understand, but He said if you defile it, if you abuse it, if you come against it strongly, it's punishable by death. And if somebody refuses to observe it, they're to be cut off and to be sent out. Now, here's the question. Why is it that the Sabbath is so important? Okay? And that's the question I want to leave you with. We're going to talk about it a little bit, but I want you to see kind of how this develops in the book of Isaiah, because I think it's probably a lot more important than you think it is. Because I know it's a lot more important than I thought it was until I started hearing the Jewish understanding of it. And then we'll talk a little bit about what it means for us as Christians. So in Isaiah 58, this is the latter part of the prophecy of Isaiah. Isaiah 53 was where it talked about the suffering servant, and now he's beginning to address some specific issues among the Jews. And in 57, that has to do with their leadership and some of the things that they were doing and some of the things that they were not doing. And so we see a lot revealed about what God desires of His people in these chapters. And you can take them and read them, and you actually make parallel to the things that Jesus said in the Gospels, the things that Paul says in his letters. These expectations really didn't change. And so going right up to the text where we're at this morning, in chapter 57, verse 21, he transitions by saying this: "There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked." And there's something He's getting ready to address here. We're told in other places it's like the waves of the sea. They just never stop moving. They're always so restless. They're always headed somewhere but going nowhere. They're always striving towards something but never reaching the goal. So I want to explain from God's standpoint in Isaiah how God thought that He was worth their time. How God was arguing with them that what He asked them to do was worth their time. That He was worthy of that time. And that He expected them to use that time very wisely. And there are many times in the Bible where God is not speaking a lot. And God is not saying a lot. And we've talked about this before, but at the time of Samuel, it said that visions were infrequent and words from the Lord were rare. The wandering in the wilderness, that 40 years, they got the manna, they got the fire, they didn't get a lot else. Moses got a little bit, and when he would share it, the people wouldn't really respond to it. Captivity was a very dark time for Israel. They thought that God really had left them and abandoned them for good. But even in the New Testament, we see that there are people like King Saul in the Old Testament that God wouldn't really show anything to. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the priests. But even the church at Corinth, there were certain things that God couldn't do among them, He said, and we talk about this when we take the Lord's Supper. He said, because of this, many of you are dying, and many of you are sick. If we don't follow the path that God has for us, it's really impossible for God to be able to bless us. So the main point is this: God is always able to save. It's never about his ability. Okay? God is always able to save. However, actions can put him at arm's length. And it's a difficult thing to understand how an omnipresent God cannot be with you, or how you have to seek an omnipresent God. But the Bible does say that you can be in the same vicinity on his planet, in his space, amidst of his creation, even in the palm of his hands, and yet not be with him. It's two people sitting on the couch together. One of them is reading a book, the other's watching TV. Proximity, they're close, but they're really not on the same page. Or when the conversation starts, and a conversation, always second thing is, I'm sorry, I missed what you said. It's very understandable how you can be in the same space with somebody and not be with somebody. Not looking them in the eye, not listening to what they're saying, not observing what it is that they're trying to reveal. And God is the same way. You can be in church and be a million miles away from him. You can have a true devotion and love for God and really not know him. In fact, the New Testament, Jesus said, you can actually go out and work the kind of miracles that would drop jaws across Palestine and still not know God in the end. Because there's a lot more to knowing God. This is what he's trying to explain to them than just knowing who he is, being one of his people, and going to religious places and knowing the religious things that all the people that know him know. So, getting into the chapter, point number 1, it says God's true people are on the same page with God. So he just said, there's no peace for the wicked. No peace for the wicked. And then he says, cry loudly and don't hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet and declare to my people their transgression. He's talking to the prophet Isaiah here. He says, and to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me by day and delight to know my ways, as a nation that has done righteousness and has not forsaken the ordinances of God. They ask me for just decisions. They delight in the nearness of God. That's all good stuff. He said, I want you, Isaiah, to get out there and say, these are the good things you're doing, okay? These are the things that I appreciate. You are seeking me. You want to do the right thing. You are looking for justice. You want me to speak on what is right and what is wrong. And you even delight in being near me. And then he says, talking from the perspective of the people, why have we then fasted and you've not seen? Why have we humbled ourselves and you do not notice? Behold, on the day of your fast, you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and strife and to strike with the wicked fist. You do not fast like you do today to make your voice heard on high. It is a fast that's that which like I choose, a day for man to humble himself. It is for knowing one's head like a reed and bowing it, and then knowing and spreading out sackcloth and ashes in bed. He says, will you call this a fast? Even an acceptable fast unto the Lord? Just like the prophet Malachi shares with us, the Israelites were doing a lot of very religious things, but they were not doing it the way that God had asked them to do it. And our understanding of grace should never force God to change his character or his nature. If God believes in justice and you are unjust, he will punish you. It doesn't matter if he's merciful or not. He won't change his character or his nature. He can't do that and still be God. He can't do that and still be mighty and still be strong. Here's where the key point is. You and I can go about and do a lot of things for him and around him and even with him and not do them in a way that honors him. That is why Jesus taught us things like it doesn't matter how much money you put in. I don't care if it's a mite. If the widow gives it out of her all she has given it out of her abundance. It matters not to me how much money you have. He told the priest in Malachi, He said, just stop lighting useless fires on my altar. I don't pay attention to your feast anymore. I don't show up to your worship services. I don't have anything to say to you. Because you fast for the things that are important for you. And that's what he said. A hard fist and wickedness and taking. He says, you've made your own group of enemies. You've determined who it is that you think I ought to be fighting against. And that's who you pray about. And that's how you pray. And you've made it your mind the people that I should be giving mercy to and the people that I should be giving wrath to. You've already decided that for me. And then you come to me and you fast and you say, God, do it the way we want it done. And he says, you know what? Those aren't my sacrifices. Those are yours. He might say today, you sing the songs that you want to sing. And you come and worship when it's convenient to you. And you find it very easy to be sacrificial in certain areas, but not in other areas. You have limits to your grace, and I don't. And in what I call stubbornness, you call discernment. And what I call rebellion, you call being shrewd. You don't understand stewardship. You don't understand what it means to walk with me and know me. And folks, the difference is a new covenant, obviously. The difference is that now Jesus actually can dwell within the heart of a person. Okay? That's a big difference. That's a big deal that God has actually reconciled us now to himself through the blood of Christ. But I don't think human nature has changed. And it doesn't matter if God not only was in our heart, but in every inch of our fiber of our being and suffocated us with a balloon shoved and pressed against us, we would still do the same thing as humans, and that is we would try to use his presence for our advantage. We would pray for the people that we want saved. And we would curse the people that we want condemned. And we would root for the team that we want, and the nation that we want, and the people that we love. We would carry burdens only for the select, and we would only carry burdens if we thought they were trying hard enough, and then we would help them. And we would make all of these nuances and these new rules, and we would add all these things, just like the Pharisees did, 713 laws of Judaism, so that then the religion would look the way that we wanted it to look. It doesn't matter that it's a new covenant in just this one thing. That you and I haven't changed. And that we're going to continue to do things the way that we want to do them in a way that we desire them to be done. And that, I believe, is why 9 out of 10 Southern Baptist churches are dying. That is why I believe we have empty pews and a bunch of pews piled in the back of the room. Because we've done things the way that we want to do them. And we've done them in a way that suits us. And you know what? We're human. And we're flawed. And we're wrong. And we should never assume that our intentions are good. And that our motives are pure. And that what we're doing is righteous. If all that could have been assumed, Jesus wouldn't have had to come and die. There's another big difference between the Jews and the Christians. And that is we have a greater understanding of who God is. And we have grace that can be given to us when we fail, so that we don't have to, as a nation, be sent into captivity or into slavery. We have so much more, the writer of Hebrews said. We have been given so much more, and Jesus made it pretty clear in his parable, to whom much has been given, much will be required. So we cannot take all the benefits of the new covenant and not accept the grave responsibility that comes with it. Folks, the key is they were sacrificing and fasting and worshiping for what they wanted. And asking God and petitioning God isn't worship. Asking God and expecting him to move because you're ready for him to move isn't the posture of a true slave or a true servant of the king. And I don't think it's a concept that we understand, because in America, everybody has a vote and everybody's important and everybody's a citizen. And you know what? Paul dealt with that same thing in Rome. I think we're really happy being Americans So happy sometimes that we forget to be the church and the community of faith. Even poor people in this country do well and eat and can send their kids to school and have better hope for the future. Folks, Israel never really had that. They depended daily and weekly and monthly and yearly on the grace of God. And still, they didn't understand that when they were in his midst, they really weren't with him. On your sheet, it says that they were seeking him to know his ways. They had not forsaken his ordinance, and they sought justice, they seek justice, and they delight in the nearness of God. And we're told the New Testament, in his presence is fullness of joy. There are benefits to knowing him. There are blessings that come with being in his midst and being in his presence. But the note here says there seems to be a problem. They're not seeing God move. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that's where we're at too. Not just viewing, but Missouri Baptist, Southern Baptist, the American church, the European church, the English-speaking church, pretty much everywhere except for a few continents where the gospel has to be taken on with such a heavy burden that if they're found out to be Christians, they will be killed. The gospel isn't doing much right now. And we're not seeing God move too much right now. And you would think this would be the time where the gospel would be spreading like wildfire, but it's not. We have the freedom to preach it. And you know what? We don't preach it a lot, and then when we do preach it, it's what we wanted to say. We choose the people that God's going to be merciful to. We choose the people that God's going to pour out wrath on. We choose the kind of people that we want to worship with, and the type of worship that we want to have, and the type of music that we want to sing, and the type of time we want to go. And if we put all these restrictions on what it is that God is trying to do, there's really not much room for him to move. They have used his expectations to their own benefits. And folks, when I hear a lot of people, godly, good-hearted, praying people talk to me about their faith, it's always about them. It's about what God has done for them, and it's about where they used to be. And in fact, that's how we tell people to share testimonies. It's never about him. It's never about what he has done, and where he has been, and where he is now, and where he is going in the future. It's only about us. And many of the songs we sing, it doesn't matter if they're in the hymn book or they're not in the hymn book and they're new stuff. A lot of them are about us and what we're going to do and the experience that we're having. From I will celebrate and sing unto the Lord, I will sing, I will do, to he walks in the garden and there I am and he walks with me and he talks with me. We have such a self-centered faith that we don't really understand what it is that God is trying to do unless he's trying to do what we're asking him to do. And when he doesn't do what we ask him to do, then our faith wanes and eventually kind of just shrivels off the vine, and then we have nothing and we walk away from the faith. And that is a ton of Baptists. And it all happened because there's this confusion about what it means to be faithful. There's a confusion about what it means to be the people of God. It says here in your note, they do not fear God. Okay, he says that in 57:11, and they worship idols in 57:12. Now they practice the rituals without God in them at all. You can't love God and money. Jesus said that. If the love of money is in you, then Jesus is not in you. You can't expect forgiveness if you can't forgive others. Jesus said that. Will a man rob God? That's what Malachi brought up in the same situation with the Israelites. If you're not a faithful giver, then you're not a faithful servant. It's the bottom line. There's no way around these things. We don't get saved by them. We get saved by the blood of Jesus. But he is trying to make us like him. He is trying to conform us to his holiness. And it's not really about the way we want to do it. Point number 2, we see that his place is the place of deliverance and guidance. And he asks some questions here. He wants to get them thinking. He says, Is this not the fast which I would choose, to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is this not to divide your bread with the hungry, and to bring home the homeless poor into the house, when you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then you will light and break out in the dawn, and your recovery will speedily spring forth, and your righteousness will go before you. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. And then, verse 9, then you will call, and the Lord will answer, and you will cry, and he will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and the spreading of wickedness, and if you give yourself to the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then your light will rise in darkness, and your gloom will become like midday, and the Lord will continually guide you and satisfy your desire in scorched places and give strength to your bones. And you will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. Those from whom among you will rebuild the ancient ruins. You will rise up the old age foundations, and you will be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to which they dwell. What did they want? They wanted God to defend them. They wanted God to guard them. They wanted God to protect them. And he says, I can't do that when you're not doing it for me. I can't work against myself. We as humans do that sometimes, to give benefits to people we love, to give a second and third and fourth and fifth chances to people we love. We've been told, never give up on them, never give up on them. Folks, sometimes they leave, and sometimes they don't love us anymore, and sometimes they walk away, just like the rich young ruler, and Jesus let him go. Satan has a million weapons to use against us. And he can keep us in the depths, and he can keep us buried, and he can keep us lost, and he can keep us struggling, and he can keep us in quicksand our entire life because we're trying to be Christian. We're trying to do the right thing. But being Christian is a very simple process. You do what God wants you to do. There's no complication to this whatsoever. If it says forgive, you do that. If it says that you need to give, you do that. If it says receive that gift humbly, then you receive it humbly. It's not rocket science. It's not complicated. It's just hard and near impossible for humans to do the things that God wants. And that's why we made it sound simple, so more people would be attracted to it. And it's not simple. We're going into battle. That's why it's easier to convince a 7 or 8-year-old to become a Christian than it is an 18 or 25-year-old. It's not just that they have most of their life figured out, they think, at that point. It's the fact that they really understand what we're asking of them. But I know when I was saved, and probably many of you, we really just thought we were getting an invitation, like a Valentine from God, and he just wanted us to come to his house so we would know him better, so that one day we could be with him in heaven. That was really the invitation. Folks, that's not at all what Jesus said. He said, deny yourself and let's go die. And you know what? I would be okay with the churches being empty if that was the gospel we've been preaching for the past 100 years. But it's not. The churches are empty because we don't expect anything of people. We don't expect anything of ourselves, and we don't have a discernment for what it is that God wants, and that is really hard for me to swallow. It's very difficult. When I'm at a Baptist school in a class and I refer to Jesus as God, and there's questions because they thought that he was just the Son of God, people that don't even really understand the deity of Christ or the doctrine of the Trinity, I'm not asking me to explain it. I'm asking you to have a grasp of it. To be able to explain what it is that makes Christianity unique and why it is that God's plan for marriage and the family is far superior to any other plan, and tolerating any other plan might not be the best way to go about showing God's love in the first place. But we don't have to choose what we think is right and do it in love. It's a very simple process. But this is what he was saying to them. If you will listen to me, if you will do what I'm asking you to do, if you will walk my straight and narrow path, I will protect you. I will ward off your enemies. I will make sure that nothing ever happens to you. I will feed you. I will take care of you. I will guide you. I will love you. But the things that are important to me have to be important to you. And I want you to write these words down. I don't often do this, but I want you to write these words down because we see this in verse 5 and 6 and 7. The things that are important to God that he mentions here in verse number 5 is humility. That is important to God. And we know it's important to God because he says so a million times, and we've been reading Proverbs, which he says it a lot there. He gives grace to the humble. He resists the proud. The humble and the meek and the pure he accepts. The second thing he desires is holiness. He desires holiness. So we see that in verse 6. And also in verse 6, we see healing. He wants to make sick people well. Think about what Jesus did when he was here on earth. He was doing that all the time. Not everybody. He didn't cure Paul when Paul had a thorn in the flesh. But man, oh man, God loves to see people made well. God loves to see people healed. That is in his nature. That is why one of his names is Jehovah Rapha. He is the healer. He binds up the brokenhearted. He does that. He loves to do that. He fixes people. He fixes relationships. He fixes nations. That's the line of work he has called himself to. And he's really good at it. But we have to allow that healing to happen. And then he's also, in verse 7, he's humane. He's humane. He is not a humanist. He doesn't believe that people are at the center of the universe. He is a theist. He believes that God himself is at the center of the universe, but he is humane. And he cares about people. And you can't read the Bible without seeing how much he cares about people and how much he expects his people, his children, to care about the people of the world too. But he's like, you don't take care of the disadvantaged. The people that are important to me are not important to you. And the things that are important to me are not important to you. So point number 2, we see the key point. He chose these sacred practices for a reason. We just went over the list in verses 6 and 7. He said, however, they made them their own, and they have chosen God as an add-on rather than the center of the fast or the worship or whatever it is they're doing. If we're here today out of habit, I will say this. I would rather you show up out of habit than not show up out of it at all. Okay? But we're supposed to come here because God has drawn us here. That's why. And the worship service is his service. Our service to him. We're coming here on our Christian Sabbath, if you will, to work. To work for him. To teach. To learn. To preach. To worship. To accept the invitation. To respond. All of those kinds of things. That's what we're here for. But the big churches, the ones that grow a lot, why? Why do they grow? You ask people. Because they like the programs they have, and they like the music they have, and they like the preaching they have, and they like getting out on time. They like having 6 different services they can pick from. And if they want to go on Tuesday night and then have the weekend off, that's totally awesome. And folks, I'm not saying that's even wrong. I'm just saying the way we go about making our religious decisions aren't very spiritual. They're not very God-centered. And it doesn't matter if it's a big church, a small church, if it's a new church or an old church, if it's a young church or a senior church, it doesn't matter. If it has a ton of programs, if it has no programs, if it has 6 different kinds of worship styles, or it has no instruments at all, it doesn't matter. We are all the same. We all want what we want out of our faith. And that's exactly the problem at the beginning of time with Adam and Eve. They wanted what they wanted out of that garden. And they took it. And it cost them. And there were times, even the most godly of the Jews, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, They wanted what they wanted out of what was in front of them, and it cost them dearly. And the nation of Israel wanted what they wanted out of that relationship. And then Jesus came, and how many nations have risen and fallen because we want what we want out of our faith? And if our faith makes our argument stronger, we love our faith. If our faith doesn't make our argument stronger, we kind of ignore our faith. So what's to blame? How did they get here? Point number one, we saw that God's true people were on the same page with God, and they clearly weren't. Point number two, we saw that his place is a place of deliverance and guidance, and then he didn't see them as being in that same place. So how did they get lost? Well, that's point number three. Veering from his presence brings great disaster. And so we'll look here at verse 13 and following, and there is a lot. But I'm going to skip down there, and we're going to go to the next chapter, a couple verses. He says, if because of the Sabbath you turn your foot from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, he says, and call the Sabbath a delight, and the holy day of the Lord honorable. And this is what he's saying, what he said in verse 3. These are your sacrifices. These aren't mine. These are your fasts. They're not mine. This is your service. This is not mine. And he says, now you've taken the Sabbath, and you've made it yours as well. He says, and you honor it, and you will desist from doing your own thing. He says, from seeking your own pleasure, from speaking your own word, then I will take delight, because you will have taken delight in Yahweh. It's powerful. Then you will have taken delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth, and I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. From the mouth the Lord has spoken. Wow. Chapter 59, verse 1, behold, the Lord's hand is not too short that it cannot save. His ear is not so dull that he cannot hear. But your iniquities have separated you. They've separation between you and your God, even though you seek him, even though you're with him. Your sins have divided you from him. Your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. You should go on and read the rest of this chapter. It's very powerful. But as Jesus said, it is entirely impossible, and I would say somewhat probable, that many people who think they know God don't. And we're worried about the people that don't come to church. I think God's probably worried about the people who come to church and really don't know him. They're not growing in him. They're not bearing fruit in him. They're not loving and forgiving. They're not praying and worshiping. God doesn't need a big crowd. He never has. 2 or 3. 2 or 3. That's a pretty low bar. But I think he understands it's really about quality and not about quantity. He said if there would be that one person that would have taken the Sabbath and really made it holy, they would have really seen me. Now, I want to talk about the Sabbath for a minute. Why is it that this was so important to God? Why was it that he rested on the seventh day, and then he said, now I want you to do the same thing. This is a sign between you and me, and if you don't do it, I'll kill you, or we'll send you out. Okay? Why is that so important? And let me ask this, why is it that it's probably the first thing that people drop when it comes to the relationship with the Lord? Now, the Sabbath, as I said, started on Friday evening. That's why it was such a blaspheme act to crucify Christ the way they did. On Thursday night, on Monday, Thursday, they rushed him through 3 trials in the dark, which was illegal. They put him on that cross, and they had to get him down because it was going to be the Sabbath, and they had to give that time to God. So they are crucifying God. And they come to break his legs so that he will suffocate quicker, so they can get him in the tomb, so they can follow God. And when he got there, he was dead. To fulfill the prophecy, not one of my bones were broken. Why? Because God was in charge of that crucifixion. Not the centurion. Not the Romans. Not the government. Not the Pharisees. Not the Jews. Jesus was in charge of his own death. He set his face to go to Jerusalem. Luke 9:51. That's the way it was going to happen. He made every call, play by play, hundreds of years beforehand. But they rushed him to the tomb. didn't have time to bring the spices and all that because they had to be religious. And then on the first day of the week, Sunday morning, they had been Sabbath. It was dark then at Saturday night. They could go. But Sunday morning, as soon as dawn broke, that was the first time that the disciples and the ladies could have gone. And so that's when they go. And he's gone. And the stones roll away. And the first thing they think is he's been stolen. Because, of course, nobody rises from the dead. A Jewish rabbi said it this way. You might want to write this down, remember, and try to think about it. Time is the only thing that God really allows you to share with Him. Think about that. You're not your own, you're His temple. Your kids are not your own, they're His. Your wealth is not your own, it's His. But there is one thing that He will allow you, that He possesses fully, and He will share with you, and that is time. You and Him can spend time together. And if somebody was to come to me and say, hey, I really want to work this out with my estranged, cousin, uncle, son, mother, father, whatever. And I said, well, you need to sit down. Let's all sit down. And if you won't give it time, it will not happen. If you will not get in the same space, there will be no healing. There will be no erring. There will be no forgiving. There will be no moving on. And what happens when people begin to rebel against the Lord? They separate themselves. What did Solomon say about that? We saw a couple weeks ago. A fool separates himself. They push themselves away. They become non-present. We call them non-resident. Folks, it's because they don't want to be near God. Well, you don't have to go to church to be near God. Well, He said He would like you to do that. And you're unwilling to do that. What does that say? My wife said, hey, if you want to make this marriage work, I just need you to stop watching the Cardinals. I would say, well, I love the Cardinals, but you know what? They've let me down a lot more than my wife ever has. Okay, fine. Is it a normal command? Well, maybe it would be if you knew me, but no, it's an odd command. But at what point do you make concessions of your own will to make relationships work? But what concessions are you making to make this relationship with God work? I'll tell you what concession He made. He came to earth and died. The most gruesome and horrifying death as an innocent man who had the authority and power and the strength of God, and yet He humbled Himself to the point of death on a cross, so that you and I might be saved. That's a concession. What concession have you made for Him? You're not willing to go to church. You're not willing to give. You're not willing to witness. You're not willing to give up that bad habit. You're not willing to go on a mission trip. You're not willing to... what concessions are you making for Him? And that's really what it's about. They're not going to save you. His blood saves you. They're not going to make Him love you anymore. He already loves you as much as He's ever going to be able to love you. He has a total, perfect, pure love for you. You are His child. But how close to Him are you going to be? What concessions are you willing to make? And you know what? We haven't talked about that because we sound a little bit charismatic. And we sound a little bit legalistic. Well, folks, the Bible's not legalistic. The Bible's truth. And we need to stop worrying so much about how we're coming off when we're speaking the truth in love. I think we do need to be concerned about people's feelings, but their feelings are not more important than God's truth. I think we have to stop going around and apologizing, being a Christian, like we're spreading some kind of terminal illness or disease. I think we have to see that this is the most important, most miraculous, most powerful, and most hopeful thing that's ever existed in creation's history. But you and I don't get that until we get into our space with God. Until we make that sacrifice to share that time with Him. And that's really what it's about. It's really what it's about. And I'm going to be the devil's advocate for a minute about church attendance. There's reasons why people don't come, and it's because this isn't really a space that's set aside for Him anyway. It's not a place where they see him. It's not a place where they hear him. It's a place where a bunch of people who love him do the things that they like to do for him. And that's why churches end up looking the same color and the same age and the same socioeconomic background, the same regional geography. It's because we all kind of like the same things, that we end up doing the same things because we enjoy doing the same things because we love the same God. And I'm not saying all that what we do is wrong. Not even that most of it is wrong. But I think we have to come to the space. We have to hear him. We have to seek him. We have to try to understand him so that we can follow him. So that we can prioritize his priorities. We just need to rest. He blessed that day, Genesis 1 tells us. He sanctified that day, which means he made it holy. And we don't do it on Saturday. We do it on Sunday because that's when the resurrection happened. And folks, the people that rest the least on Sundays are usually the ministers. And I don't think we should be legalistic and say, well, I saw you out mowing the lawn on a Sunday. Folks, if the lawn needs mowed, mow it. Mow it with Jesus. Pray, worship him. Keep your eyes open. But make his time important to you. In fact, what the New Testament says, and Paul, Jesus did celebrate the Sabbath. Paul did celebrate the Sabbath, but when he started ministering to Gentiles, he didn't do it anymore. But when he was with Jews, he did. Why? Because it's a very important and noble concept, but it's not a part of being a Christian necessarily. Because you're not saved by it. We now have God dwelling in us. We now have the thick presence of God on us. We don't have to go find him on the Sabbath, or go find him at the temple, or go find him at the church. He is right there. He is very, very close to us. But what we have to do is we have to give that sacred time to him. Some people do it in daily devotions. Some people do it in taking a day off for a week. Some people do it by taking a week's, a year for a retreat. But it needs to be you sitting still with God. Not you preaching, not you teaching, not you ministering, not you doing mission trips, not you doing disaster relief, not you doing the things you enjoy doing for God, but just you being with God. And that's when you will hear him say, this is what's important to me. This is where I would like for you to go. This is what I would like for you to do. Folks, his arm is plenty long to save. And his strength is as good as it's ever been. But if we want him to heal us, and we want him to help us, and we want him to guide us, and we want him to grow us, then we have to play by his rules. The New Testament didn't change his rules. The New Testament changed the ability that we have to follow them. And to say that works aren't important is just a foolish statement that's unbiblical. They are as important as they've ever been. They just weren't as important as the Jews thought they were. They can't save you. But they can definitely bring honor and worship and glory to God, which is our key thing. So the Sabbath, we see on your sheet, it's a sanctuary of time and space. And time is the only thing that we can really share with God. Remembrance, reflection, reassessment. We can all afford this. This is something we can all give to God. It doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, what you do, you can afford time. The note here is this: the new covenant in Christ covers this sin. It brings us into his presence and on his page and in lockstep with his leading, except when it doesn't, which is far too often for us. There's no excuse for it. Then we must discern. Are we the ones who do not know him? The ones who await discipline because we're disobedient to him? Or the ones who he is patiently drawing to himself and making holy? Before you put everything away, I want you to write down this word right by making holy: sanctification. Do a word study and look it up. That's all Paul talks about. Talks about you guys getting along and being unified and being sanctified. It means being made holy. It It means being made like Him. And that's what Paul talks about in Romans 8. He is conforming us to the image of Christ. That's what we're supposed to be doing as Christians. Christ in you, the hope of glory. We're supposed to become a glorified being after our death that completely and utterly honors Him at all times. But folks, we have to submit ourselves to the process. I can love my country and I can want to go out and fight evil, but I don't think you want me going out with a bunch of weapons into a place I don't know until I've gone to basic training and got some training. I would love to go share the gospel with the people who live in Germany. I don't speak German. You would think I would need to learn that if I felt God calling me to go there. And not just their language, but their culture. Folks, you can't just go out with a water pistol and try to take down hell. It doesn't work like that. Your zeal is not going to save you. But your time with God just might. And if you will spend that sacred time with Him, if you will share that time with Him, if you will make that sacrifice that you can afford, then you will hear His voice. You will know His will. Jesus said this, "My sheep know my voice. They will follow me. They will not follow another." You will know His voice. You will understand what He wants you to do, and in faith you will be able to step out and do it. And when you pray, your prayers will be answered because you're already asking Him for things He's just been waiting to give you. But it all starts with time. And folks, when it comes to God, that means everything. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this passage. Thank you for the gift of the Sabbath and for holy time. And I thank you, Lord, that you've made yourself so much more accessible to us as Christians. But God, I'm afraid that we have taken that for granted. We've taken advantage of that. And Lord, we have not set aside time for you. May we do that, Lord. May you speak to us. May we see your guidance and your will. Lord, may we be the people you've called us to be as you make us holy. We pray in Jesus' name.